Dr. Amelia Chin pressed her forehead against the reinforced glass of Laboratory 7, watching the sunrise paint the abandoned cityscape in shades of amber and crimson. 43 days since the first confirmed case. 37 days since the initial outbreak in Mumbai. 22 days since the WHO declared a global emergency. 15 days since the last government broadcast. 3 days since she'd heard from anyone outside the Helix biotechnology compound. The coffee in her hands had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Beyond the perimeter fence, she could see them, the infected, shuffling between overturned cars and debris-filled streets. Their movements were mechanical, purposeless, like broken marionettes operated by a cruel puppeteer. Yet when fresh prey appeared, they transformed into something terrifyingly efficient. "Dr. Chin?" Amelia turned to find Marcus Webb, her research assistant, standing in the doorway. His lab coat was wrinkled, his dark hair disheveled from another sleepless night. At 28, Marcus had been the brightest molecular biology graduate she'd ever worked with. Now dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his hands shook slightly from too much caffeine and too little hope. "The latest batch of cultures is ready for testing," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. They both knew what that meant, another potential failure to add to their growing collection. Amelia nodded, finally turning away from the window. "Any word from the other labs?" Marcus shook his head. "Radio silence from Geneva. Same with the CDC facility in Atlanta and the Institute in Beijing. We might be—" "Don't say it." Amelia cut him off sharply. "There are other facilities. Other teams working on this." But even as she spoke the words, she didn't believe them. The Helix compound, nestled in the Colorado Rockies, had been designed as a self-sufficient research facility for exactly this kind of scenario. Solar power, underground water reserves, hydroponic gardens, and enough supplies to last 6 months. Dr. Harrison Blackwood, the company's founder and Amelia's mentor, had been called paranoid for such preparations. Now it seemed like prescience. "Show me the cultures," Amelia said, following Marcus down the sterile white corridor toward the main laboratory. The Helix facility had been investigating viral hemorrhagic fevers when the first reports emerged from South Asia. A new pathogen, highly contagious, with a mortality rate approaching 90%. The initial symptoms resembled a severe flu, fever, muscle aches, vomiting. But within 72 hours, something unprecedented happened. The dead came back. Not in any mystical sense, but through a horrifying biological process that Amelia was only beginning to understand. The virus, designated V0 by the CDC before communication ceased, didn't just kill its hosts. It rewrote their neural pathways, destroyed higher brain functions while preserving the brain's stem and motor cortex. The result was a creature driven by primitive impulses, the need to feed, to spread the infection, to hunt. The laboratory buzzed with the quiet hum of centrifuges and air filtration systems. Dr. Sarah Kovac, their virologist, looked up from a microscope as they entered. At 55, Sarah had spent her career studying some of the world's deadliest pathogens. Amelia had never seen her rattled by anything, until V0. "The viral load in this batch is consistent with our previous samples," Sarah reported, her German accent thick with exhaustion. "The protein synthesis inhibitors showed some promise in the early stages, but the virus adapted within hours." Amelia moved to the containment unit where dozens of petri dishes held infected tissue samples. Under high magnification, V0 was beautiful in its complexity, a crystalline structure that seemed almost geometric in its perfection. It was also the most efficient killer she'd ever encountered. "What about the interferon treatments?" Amelia asked. "Temporary reduction in viral replication, but not enough to prevent cellular death," Sarah replied. "The virus has some kind of protection mechanism we haven't identified yet." Marcus pulled up data on one of the workstation monitors. "I've been analyzing the genetic sequence, comparing it to known viral families. There are similarities to rabies, particularly in how it affects neural tissue, but the replication mechanism is completely novel." Amelia studied the scrolling data, looking for patterns, for anything that might represent a weakness. V0 was unlike anything in the literature. It combined the worst aspects of multiple viral types, the transmission efficiency of influenza, the neural targeting of rabies, the rapid mutation rate of HIV, and something else, something that kept infected tissue viable even after clinical death. Dr. Chin, a voice called from across the lab. Tom Rodriguez, their immunologist, was hunched over another workstation, his expression tight with concentration. I think I found something. Amelia hurried over, her heart racing with the possibility of a breakthrough. Tom was examining blood samples under high magnification, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he adjusted the imaging parameters. Look at this, Tom said, pointing to the screen. I was studying the immune response in samples taken from victims in different stages of infection. In the early stages, the body mounts a typical inflammatory response, white cell count spikes, antibody production increases. But then something changes. The image showed blood cells in various stages of infection. The healthy cells appeared as smooth, round discs, while the infected ones were distorted, covered in crystalline viral particles. The virus doesn't just evade the immune system, Tom continued. It co-opts it. These infected white cells aren't dying, they're being reprogrammed. They start producing viral proteins instead of antibodies. Amelia leaned closer, studying the data. That's how it spreads so quickly. The immune system becomes a delivery mechanism. Exactly. But here's the interesting part. Tom switched to another image. I found this in a blood sample from a victim who survived longer than average, almost 5 days before turning. Look at the T-cell population. The image showed a cluster of cells that appeared different from the others. They were larger, more active, and seemed to be actively fighting the infection. These T-cells are producing something, Tom said. Some kind of protein that's interfering with viral replication. It's not enough to stop the infection completely, but it's definitely slowing it down. Amelia felt the first spark of genuine hope she'd experienced in weeks. Can you isolate this protein? Already working on it, Tom replied. If I can identify the specific sequence and synthesize it artificially, we might have the basis for a treatment, Amelia finished. Behind them, Marcus was frantically taking notes, while Sarah prepared new culture samples. For the first time since the outbreak began, the team was working with purpose instead of desperation. But their moment of hope was interrupted by a sharp alarm from the security system. Emergency lights bathed the laboratory in flashing red as automated voice announced. Perimeter breach detected. All personnel report to designated safe areas immediately. Amelia ran to the security monitor, her blood turning cold at what she saw. The main gate had been torn open, and dozens of infected were streaming onto the compound. They moved with terrifying coordination, as if guided by some collective intelligence. How is that possible? Marcus whispered. The fence is electrified. The gate is reinforced steel. On the monitor, Amelia could see the answer. Among the infected were several wearing the remnants of military uniforms. They had used explosives to breach the perimeter, suggesting a level of planning and tool use that shouldn't have been possible for creatures driven by primitive impulses. They're learning, Sarah said quietly. The virus is evolving. The emergency protocols activated automatically, sealing Laboratory 7 with blast doors designed to withstand a direct missile strike. Amelia and her team were trapped, but they were also protected, for now. How long can we hold out? Marcus asked, checking the environmental systems display. Air filtration and power are independent, Amelia replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. Food and water for maybe 10 days if we're careful. Through the security cameras, they watched the infected spread throughout the compound. Most moved with the typical shambling gait they'd come to expect, but some, the military ones, displayed purposeful behavior. They examined doors, tested windows, and seemed to be mapping the facility. Look at this one, Tom said, pointing to a monitor showing the main corridor. An infected wearing the tattered remains of a scientist's lab coat was standing perfectly still in front of a keypad-locked door. After several minutes of apparent concentration, it began entering numbers. "That's impossible," Sarah breathed. "The virus destroys higher brain functions. They shouldn't be able to remember access codes. Unless some neural pathways remain intact," Amelia said, her mind racing through the implications. What if the virus doesn't completely destroy memory? What if it selectively preserves certain knowledge while eliminating inhibitions and self-awareness? The infected scientist continued working at the keypad, its movements becoming more confident with each attempt. On the third try, the door clicked open. They retain muscle memory, Marcus realized. Professional skills, learned behaviors, but without the cognitive framework to understand what they're doing or why. It was a terrifying prospect. An infected surgeon might still be able to perform operations, but without the ability to distinguish between patient and victim. A pilot could fly a plane but wouldn't understand concepts like safety or landing procedures. "We need to focus," Amelia said, turning away from the monitors. "If the compound is compromised, this might be our last chance to develop a treatment." But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. If the infected could retain professional knowledge, how long before they figured out how to breach the laboratory's defenses? Tom had returned to his protein analysis, working with renewed urgency. "I've isolated the sequence," he announced. "It's a modified interferon, specifically interferon gamma, but with additional amino acid chains I don't recognize." "Can you synthesize it?" Amelia asked. "In theory, yes. But I'll need the bioprinter, and that means accessing the main production lab." Tom gestured toward the sealed blast door. "Which is currently crawling with infected." Sarah looked up from her microscope. "There might be another way. The emergency supply cache in Sublab C has a portable synthesizer. It's not as sophisticated as the main unit, but it might be enough for a prototype." Amelia knew Sublab C, a smaller facility 2 levels down, accessible through the emergency tunnel system. It had been designed as a backup workspace in case the main laboratories became unusable. The tunnel required biometric authorization, making it unlikely the infected could access it. "That tunnel hasn't been used in years," Marcus pointed out. "We don't know if the life support systems are still functional." "It's a risk we have to take," Amelia said. "Tom, how long do you need to prepare the synthesis parameters?" "Give me 2 hours to finalize the protein sequence and configure the synthesizer programming." "Good. Marcus, check the emergency supplies. We'll need portable air filtration masks and backup power cells. Sarah, I want you to prepare tissue samples for immediate testing once we have a prototype." As her team worked, Amelia studied the facility schematics on her tablet. The emergency tunnel system connected all the major laboratories through a series of reinforced passages designed to allow evacuation even in the event of catastrophic facility damage. The tunnels were narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people, and equipped with multiple security checkpoints. On the security monitors, she could see the infected had spread throughout the compound. They seemed particularly interested in the research facilities, pressing against doors and windows as if they could sense the presence of living humans inside. Some had begun to exhibit disturbing behaviors, scratching at walls in complex patterns, arranging debris in geometric shapes, emitting low-frequency vocalizations that almost sounded like communication. "Dr. Chen," Marcus called from the supply locker. "We have a problem." Amelia joined him at the emergency equipment station. The biometric scanner for the tunnel access was flashing red, displaying an error message. "System offline, maintenance required." "When was the last time anyone used these tunnels?" Marcus asked. 3 years ago, during the earthquake drill," Amelia replied, her heart sinking. "But the system should have automatic maintenance protocols." She connected her tablet to the diagnostic port, running through the system's status reports. The tunnel's life support was functional, but the biometric locks had defaulted to maximum security after extended disuse. They would need administrative override codes to access the tunnels, codes that only Dr. Blackwood possessed. "His office," Sarah said, understanding immediately. "Harrison keeps the master codes in his personal safe." Dr. Blackwood's office was in the administration wing, 3 floors up from their current location. Getting there would mean traversing areas of the facility that were almost certainly compromised. "There has to be another way," Tom said, looking up from his protein synthesis calculations. "Emergency protocols, backup systems." Amelia was already shaking her head. "Harrison was paranoid about security. He designed these systems to be tamper-proof." She paused, studying the facility schematic again. "But there is one other option." She traced a path with her finger from their current location to the administration wing. The main laboratory had a ventilation shaft that connected to the building's central air system. The shaft was large enough for a person to crawl through and included maintenance access points throughout the facility. "You can't be serious," Marcus said. "Those shafts aren't designed for human transit. They're barely wide enough, and some sections have active air circulation systems that could—" "It's the only way," Amelia cut him off. "The alternative is waiting here until our supplies run out." "I'll go," Tom volunteered. "I'm the smallest, and you need to coordinate the synthesis once we have access to Sublab C." Amelia shook her head. "I know the facility layout better than anyone except Harrison. And if something goes wrong, you're the only one who can complete the protein synthesis." She moved to the emergency supply locker, pulling out a portable air filter, emergency flashlight, and tablet computer. The ventilation shaft access was behind a maintenance panel in the northwest corner of the laboratory. "Give me 4 hours," Amelia said, clipping the equipment to her belt. "If I'm not back by then, try to reach Sublab C through the main corridors." "Amelia, wait," Sarah said, grabbing her arm. "What if the codes aren't in Harrison's office? What if he changed them or moved them to a different location?" It was a valid concern. Dr. Blackwood had been obsessive about security protocols, often changing access codes without notice. But Amelia knew her mentor better than anyone. He was methodical, predictable in his paranoia. "He'll have left backup protocols," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Harrison always has contingencies." The maintenance panel opened with a soft hiss, revealing a rectangular shaft that stretched into darkness. The metal interior was lined with insulation and dotted with air circulation grills every 10 meters. Amelia attached her tablet to her wrist and activated the facility map, highlighting the route to the administration wing. "Radio check every 30 minutes, she told the team. "If you don't hear from me for more than an hour, assume I'm not coming back and proceed with alternative options." She climbed into the shaft, immediately feeling the weight of claustrophobia pressing down on her. The space was exactly as cramped as it appeared, forcing her to crawl on hands and knees through the narrow passage. The metal walls conducted sound with alarming efficiency. She could hear the movements of the infected throughout the facility, their footsteps and vocalizations creating a constant, unsettling soundtrack to her journey. After 20 minutes of crawling, Amelia reached the first major junction. According to her tablet, she needed to take a left passage toward the central hub. But as she approached the intersection, she heard something that made her blood freeze. Scraping sounds coming from directly ahead. She switched off her flashlight and waited, controlling her breathing as carefully as possible. The sounds continued, metal on metal, as if something was moving through the ventilation system. Through the darkness, she could see a faint light approaching from the left passage. Not the steady beam of a flashlight, but something irregular, flickering. As it grew closer, she realized what she was seeing. Sparks. Something was cutting through the metal walls of the ventilation shaft. Amelia quickly backed away from the junction, retreating toward an access grill she'd passed a few meters back. The cutting sounds grew louder, accompanied by the acrid smell of burning metal. Whatever was in the shaft with her, it was using tools, which meant it retained enough cognitive function to problem-solve and manipulate complex equipment. She reached the access grill and peered through the slats into the room below. It was one of the smaller research labs, apparently empty of infected. The cutting sounds were getting closer, echoing through the metal passages like approaching thunder. Making a split-second decision, Amelia opened the access grill and dropped into the room below. She landed hard on a laboratory bench, scattering equipment across the floor. Pain shot through her left ankle, but she forced herself to move, hiding behind a bank of refrigeration units just as sparks began raining down from the ventilation shaft above. Through the gap in the ceiling, she could see the source of the cutting, an infected wearing the remains of a maintenance worker's uniform, using an industrial welding torch with disturbing precision. It had somehow figured out how to operate the equipment, and was systematically cutting through the shaft walls, creating a larger passage. The implications were terrifying. The infected weren't just retaining muscle memory, they were adapting, learning to use tools in new ways to overcome obstacles. If they could modify the facility's infrastructure, nowhere would be safe. The welding stopped, and Amelia held her breath as she listened to the creature moving through the enlarged opening. Its footsteps were measured, careful, as if it was examining its work. After several minutes, the sounds faded as it continued deeper into the ventilation system. Amelia waited another 10 minutes before emerging from her hiding place. Her ankle throbbed with each step, but she could still walk. The room's door led to a service corridor that connected to the administration wing, offering an alternative route to Dr. Blackwood's office. She activated her radio. "This is Amelia. Change of plans. The ventilation system is compromised. I'm taking an alternate route." Marcus's voice crackled through the static. "Are you safe? We heard sounds coming from the air vents. I'm mobile. Estimate another 90 minutes to reach Harrison's office." "Copy that. Tom's making good progress on the protein sequence. We'll be ready to move as soon as you have those codes." Amelia switched off the radio and moved to the door, checking the corridor beyond through the reinforced window. The hallway appeared empty, but she knew appearances could be deceiving. The infected had demonstrated they could remain motionless for extended periods, waiting for prey to come within range. She opened the door carefully, wincing as the hinges creaked softly. The corridor stretched in both directions, lined with office doors and junction boxes for the facility's electrical systems. Emergency lighting cast long shadows that seemed to move in her peripheral vision. Dr. Blackwood's office was 3 floors up and 2 wings over, a journey that would normally take 5 minutes, but now seemed like crossing a minefield. Amelia moved slowly, checking each corner before proceeding, listening for any sound that might indicate nearby infected. The first floor passed without incident, but as she climbed the emergency stairwell to the second level, she heard voices. Not the mindless moaning she'd come to associate with the infected, but actual conversation. Low, urgent whispers coming from the floor above. Amelia froze on the landing, straining to make out the words. The voices were distorted, as if the speakers were having difficulty with articulation, but the cadence was unmistakably human. "Facility schematics, lower levels. Containment protocols, bypass. Living subjects, research value." Her blood turned to ice as she realized what she was hearing. These weren't mindless creatures driven by primitive impulses. They were planning, coordinating, and they were specifically interested in the research facilities and the surviving scientists. The virus wasn't just preserving muscle memory, it was maintaining enough cognitive function to allow for strategic thinking, but without human ethics or empathy to constrain their actions. The infected had become something far more dangerous than rabid animals. They had become intelligent predators. Amelia remained frozen on the stairwell landing, listening to the conversation above her. The voices were clearer now, and she could make out at least 3 distinct speakers. Their words were slurred, as if they were speaking through damaged vocal cords, but the meaning was unmistakable. "Thermal imaging shows 4 heat signatures in Laboratory 7. Blast door requires shaped charges, maintenance tunnels alternative access. Preserve specimens, research continuation priority." They knew exactly where she and her team were hiding. Worse, they understood the facility's security systems and were actively planning to breach the laboratory's defenses. The infected weren't just learning, they were retaining professional knowledge while losing human constraints. Moving as quietly as possible, Amelia continued up the stairs, staying close to the wall to minimize creaking. She needed those access codes, but she also needed to warn her team about what they were truly facing. The administration wing was eerily quiet compared to the research levels. Dr. Blackwood's office occupied a corner position with windows overlooking the main entrance. As Amelia approached the door, she could see through the glass panels that the office appeared undisturbed. She tried the door handle, unlocked. Harrison had always been meticulous about security, which meant either he'd left in a hurry or someone else had been here first. The office was exactly as she remembered: floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk, and photographs from Dr. Blackwood's distinguished career in virology. His computer was still running, displaying a screensaver of molecular structures. Amelia moved to the desk, looking for any sign of what had happened to her mentor. A half-finished cup of coffee sat next to a stack of research papers. The date stamp on the papers showed they were from 6 days ago, around the time communications with the outside world had ceased. A notebook lay open beside the computer, filled with Harrison's distinctive handwriting. Amelia read the final entry. Day 37 post-outbreak. CDC reports confirmed. V0 has breached all containment protocols. European facilities compromised. Asian research network offline. Local law enforcement estimates suggest infection rate exceeding 60% in populated areas. Team evacuation complete. All non-essential personnel evacuated to designated safe zones. Essential research staff, Chen, Kovac, Rodriguez, Webb, secured in Laboratory 7 with 30-day supply reserves. Implementing final protocol authorization codes secured in Vault 7 Alpha. If V0 demonstrates adaptive learning beyond projected parameters, initiate total facility sterilization procedures. Amelia's hands trembled as she read the last line. Harrison had planned for the possibility that the virus might evolve beyond their initial understanding. The final protocol could only mean one thing: a failsafe designed to destroy the entire facility rather than allow the research to fall into the wrong hands. She moved to the wall safe behind Harrison's desk, entering the master code sequence he taught her years ago for emergencies. The heavy door swung open, revealing a collection of documents, data drives, and a sealed emergency packet marked "Final Protocol Authorization Required." Among the materials was a tablet computer configured with administrative access to all facility systems. Amelia activated it, quickly navigating to the tunnel access controls. With a few keystrokes, she overrode the biometric requirements and unlocked the emergency passage to Sublab C. But as she worked, her radio crackled with urgent transmissions from her team. "Amelia, we have movement in the main corridor." Marcus's voice was tight with stress. "Multiple infected, but they're not trying to breach the door. They're just waiting." "Copy that," she replied quietly. "I have the access codes. Beginning return journey now." "Wait," Tom's voice cut in. "I'm reading some kind of electromagnetic interference. It's affecting our communication and computer systems." Amelia checked the tablet. Several facility systems were showing error messages. Power grid fluctuations, network connectivity issues, and automated security failures. Someone was systematically disabling the facility's electronic infrastructure. Through the office window, she could see infected moving with purpose throughout the compound. Some were at maintenance panels, others were examining the power grid connections. They were conducting coordinated sabotage operations with a level of technical sophistication that should have been impossible. "They're cutting our power," she radioed to her team. "Emergency backup systems only. Switch to battery reserves for all critical equipment." "Amelia," Sarah's voice came through heavy static. "The infected in the corridor, they're communicating. We can hear them through the walls. They're planning something for when the power goes out." Amelia grabbed the emergency packet and administrative tablet, quickly reviewing the final protocol documentation. It was exactly what she'd feared: a nuclear self-destruct system designed to sterilize the facility, and everything within a 5-mile radius. Dr. Blackwood had built Helix to contain the world's deadliest pathogens, and he'd planned for the worst-case scenario. The protocol required simultaneous authorization from 2 senior researchers and had a 12-hour countdown once initiated. But reading the technical specifications, Amelia realized it could be the solution to more than just containing the research materials. If the infected retained enough cognitive function to coordinate attacks and use tools, they could potentially spread beyond the immediate outbreak zones. They could preserve enough human knowledge to operate transportation systems, communication networks, even weapons systems. A handful of infected scientists or military personnel could trigger a global catastrophe that made the current outbreak look manageable. But the final protocol would eliminate not just the infected at Helix. It would also destroy her research, the protein synthesis data, and their only hope for developing a cure. She activated her radio, fighting through increasing static interference. Tom, what's the status on protein synthesis? Sequence is complete and verified. I need another hour to configure the synthesizer and run preliminary tests. Sarah, how quickly can you prepare tissue samples for live testing? Samples are ready. But Amelia, the electromagnetic interference is affecting our analysis equipment. We might not be able to verify results properly. Amelia made a rapid calculation. The infected were systematically disabling the facility's systems, which meant they were planning a coordinated assault once the defenses were compromised. Her team had perhaps 2 hours before Laboratory 7's blast doors lost power. But if Tom could synthesize the protein and they could test it on live infected tissue, they might be able to prove the treatment concept before triggering the final protocol. New plan, she radioed. Maintain emergency power to essential systems only. Tom, proceed with synthesis using battery backup. Sarah, prepare for immediate testing protocols. I'm returning via the maintenance tunnels, estimated arrival in 45 minutes. She gathered the materials from the safe and moved toward the door, but stopped as she heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Through the glass panels, she could see 3 figures approaching, infected wearing the remnants of Helix security uniforms. But these weren't shuffling mindlessly like the others. They moved with military precision, checking doors methodically and communicating through subtle hand signals. One carried what appeared to be electronic scanning equipment, while another had a portable cutting torch similar to the one she'd encountered in the ventilation system. Amelia backed away from the door, looking for alternative escape routes. The office windows were reinforced but could potentially be broken. However, the administration wing was 3 stories above ground level, a fall that would likely prove fatal. The scanning equipment beeped softly, and one of the infected pointed directly at the office door. They had detected her presence, possibly through thermal imaging or motion sensors. She quickly moved to Dr. Blackwood's desk, pulling out the administrative tablet and accessing the final protocol interface. If she was going to die here, she could at least ensure the outbreak didn't spread beyond the facility. But as she prepared to input the authorization codes, her radio crackled with Tom's voice. Amelia, I'm seeing something incredible. The protein synthesis is working, but not how we expected. It's not just interfering with viral replication, it's actually reversing the neural damage. Amelia froze, her finger hovering over the final protocol activation sequence. What do you mean reversing? The infected tissue samples are showing restoration of normal cellular activity. The viral load is dropping, and healthy neural pathways are regenerating. This isn't just a treatment, it could be a cure. Outside the office, the infected had begun cutting through the door locks with precision tools. Sparks flew as they worked, and she could smell the acrid odor of burning metal. They would breach the door within minutes. Tom, can you synthesize enough for human trials? In theory, yes. But I need time and proper equipment. The portable synthesizer can only produce small quantities. How much time? 6 hours for a clinically viable dose. Maybe 4 if we accept higher risk parameters. Amelia looked at the final protocol countdown sequence. Once initiated, it couldn't be stopped. 12 hours to evacuation or total sterilization. If Tom was right about the protein's effectiveness, those 12 hours might be enough to synthesize and test a working cure. But first, she had to survive the next few minutes. The cutting torch had breached the door lock, and she could hear the infected speaking in their disturbing, slurred voices. Subject located, priority acquisition, research value maximum. They weren't planning to kill her immediately. They wanted her alive, possibly to continue research under their direction. The implications were horrifying: intelligent infected using living scientists as tools to advance their own agenda. Amelia made her decision. She activated the final protocol authorization sequence, entering her credentials and Dr. Blackwood's emergency codes. The tablet displayed a confirmation request. Final protocol initiated. Secondary authorization required within 30 minutes or automatic abort. She would need Sarah's authorization codes to complete the sequence, but that gave her team a window of opportunity. If they could synthesize and test the protein cure within 12 hours, they might be able to evacuate before the sterilization sequence completed. The office door swung open, and the 3 infected security personnel entered with coordinated precision. The lead figure, a woman wearing the remnants of a tactical vest, spoke in that unnaturally flat tone she'd heard before. Dr. Chin. Research continuation required. Compliance necessary for optimal outcomes. Amelia backed against the window, clutching the administrative tablet. I won't help you. Resistance counterproductive, the woman replied, raising what appeared to be an electronic stunning device. Neural patterns indicate high-value scientific knowledge. Preservation priority alpha. The other 2 infected moved to flank her, their movements coordinated like a military unit. But as they closed in, Amelia noticed something crucial. They were avoiding certain areas of the office, staying away from the windows and keeping their distance from electronic equipment. The electromagnetic interference Tom had mentioned wasn't just affecting their systems, it was affecting the infected as well. Whatever was preserving their cognitive abilities was sensitive to certain types of electromagnetic radiation. Amelia lunged for Dr. Blackwood's emergency radio transmitter, a high-powered unit designed to punch through electronic interference. She cranked the power to maximum and activated the emergency broadcast frequency. The effect was immediate and dramatic. All 3 infected suddenly convulsed, their coordinated movements dissolving into random spasms. The electronic equipment they carried sparked and failed, and their attempts at communication became incoherent moaning. Neural interference patterns, system disruption, cognitive matrix unstable. The lead infected collapsed, its sophisticated behavior reverting to the mindless aggression she'd expected from the beginning. The other 2 began moving erratically, their tool use degrading to simple manipulation. Amelia realized she'd discovered something crucial. The infected's retained intelligence was dependent on some kind of bioelectric field that could be disrupted by high-intensity electromagnetic radiation. If they could weaponize this discovery. But there was no time to develop the concept further. The radio's battery was limited, and she could already see the infected beginning to recover from the initial electromagnetic pulse. She grabbed the final protocol materials and ran for the stairwell, leaving the radio transmitter running at maximum power. Behind her, she could hear the infected stumbling around the office, their cognitive functions slowly returning but still impaired.